I told you we would get to change eventually, and here we are. So what does this book have to do with Andrew Tate? Well, that will be revealed later. First of all, no doubt you have opinions on the guy, and whether you like him or you don't, it's irrelevant for the purpose of this video. And if you only limit yourself to people that you like, the opinions and arguments of those you like, well, you're limiting yourself, so try and put that aside for now. So before I get to the excerpt from the book, we'll have to share the anecdote from Tate that it relates to. Some of you may have heard about it. I think he's recalled it a few times, a few years ago. And so he describes this day where he's at a girlfriend's house with a friend, and the ex-boyfriend of the girl shows up to the house with a group of his friends armed with hammers. And they're demanding that Tate apologize to the ex for somehow stealing this woman from him. So even though they're outnumbered, Tate and his friend go outside to confront the guys. I think there's 5 or 6 of them. And as mentioned, the ex ostensibly just wants an apology and then they will leave. Now, Tate being Tate, he refuses, which upsets his friend, who turns to him and urges him to just apologize so they can just get this over with and they can leave. Now, upon hearing this suggestion from the friend, Tate turns to his friend and belts him in the mouth, knocking him out clean. And then Tate goes back inside with the group of bloodthirsty men looking on, no doubt kind of puzzled as to what they just witnessed. And according to Tate, at this point, they just leave and the conflict is over. Along with Tate's friendship with his previous friend. So, to some of you, perhaps that anecdote sounds implausible and it's just a means of showing Tate in a positive light, but it didn't really happen. Well, when I first heard it, I actually did believe it and didn't seem all that crazy at all. And one of the reasons for that is because of this book that we're going to look at. And if you read enough psychology and psychology related to communication, at some point you'll hit on this phenomenon, this concept of paradox, that relates to situations where from the outside a decision or a piece of behavior seems completely irrational, illogical, but it ends up being the most effective course of action one can take. So let me share now the anecdote from the book, from the preface of the book, and see if you can see any overlap between this and Tate's story. All right. When in 1334, the Duchess of Tyrol, Margareta Maltache, encircled the castle of Hohostowitz in the province of Carinthia, she knew only too well that the fortress, situated on an incredibly steep rock, rising high above the valley floor, was impregnable to direct attack and would yield only to a long siege. In due course, the situation of the defenders became critical. They were down to their last ox and had only 2 bags of barleycorn left. Margareta's situation was becoming increasingly equally pressing, albeit for different reasons. Her troops were beginning to be unruly, there seemed to be no end to the siege in sight, and she had similarly urgent military business elsewhere. At this point, the commandant of the castle decided on a desperate course of action, which to his men must have seemed sheer folly. He had the last ox slaughtered, had its abdominal cavity filled with the remaining barley, and ordered the carcass thrown down the steep cliff onto a meadow in front of the enemy camp. Upon receiving this scornful message from above, the discouraged Duchess abandoned the siege and moved on. All right. So, hopefully you could see the overlap there in that multi-century old story and Tate's more recent one, and how they both share this theme we were talking about, this paradoxical theme, whereby from the outside, the decision seems insane. In Tate's case, the idea that when you're outnumbered, you would decommission your only ally as a means of resolving the conflict. And in the case of the siege, that while surrounded and running out of food, you would sacrifice your remaining food rather than ration it. To hear this suggested to you if you're in those situations would no doubt seem crazy. The last thing you would think of doing. But this is one of the main themes of the book, that although we like to think that if we just apply reason and logic and rationality to problems, that will give us the best chance of solving them. There are times when that has the opposite effect, where it actually maintains issues that we're aiming to resolve. And that paradoxically, if we opt for the opposite of that, sometimes that is far more effective in getting us what we want, even if it offends our rational faculties. So human beings, we're not always that simple. And sometimes we have to think a bit more creatively if we want to solve difficult problems. All right, so I think we can keep it short and sweet today. That's all I really wanted to mention. I'll no doubt return to this book at some point. There's a lot of great ideas in it, and I've referenced some of them already in previous videos, this notion of second and first order change. But I'm sure we'll come back to it. So we'll leave it there. Thanks. Talk to you next time.